Hello and welcome everybody, it's Matt from Cardboard Odysseys. I've got another deck tech for you. This is Gitrog, the Ravenous Ride. Actually one of my favorite new commanders besides Indominus Rex. There's actually a ton of bangers coming out, I'll be honest. They're just killing it with the crazy cool commanders. A lot of very fun ways to build around, and this was one of those decks kind of like Indominus Rex where you play cards that like you normally would never play. So let's get into it. So it's a 5 mana, 6/5. Oh, and there's two different versions of this deck. There's a unbudgeted version and a budgeted version. That'll be down in the description below. So make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, so 5 mana, 6/5, trample haste, already decent value. And whenever the Gitrog Ravenous Ride deals common damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that's saddled at this turn. Oh yeah, it's one of those new saddle cards. So saddle one, you can, I think it's like something like as long as the creature has a power of more than one, they can saddle it, and you can only do it one time. And you have to saddle. So if you have saddled with multiple creatures, you have to do it all at once. Sometimes you want to saddle it with more than one creature, just in case they try to remove the creature before you deal common damage. You'll still have something to sacrifice. So kind of like keep that in your mind. But yeah, so whenever it deals common damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that's saddled at this turn. If you do, draw X cards, then put X lands from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. So the whole goal here is to be playing big, dirtily creatures that are normally bad, that have bad effects on them, but they're super cheap, and they come out before the Gitrog monster, so that you can saddle them and then get a ton of value. And the fact that Gitrog monster has haste and trample is very strong. Even if the Gitrog monster dies, you're going to gain a ton of value, draw a ton of cards, and hopefully play a ton of lands. Yeah. Which, realistically, I probably should play a couple more lands in the deck. It's a little light at 33 plus 2 MDFCs. So if you'd like to add more land, which I actually might look back, I might add it to the deck list. But either way, we're going to go with what we got now, because I've played it and it's fun. First one, Avenger of Zendikar. So this one is a big daddy. 7 mana for a 5/5, and when it enters the battlefield, you get a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control, and then landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get a 1/1 counter on it for each plant creature you control. So that's mainly in there for getting a bunch of the plants, and then whenever you connect, you can't really saddle it with Avenger, because Avenger won't be on the battlefield when you get all the lands. But you really want to keep Avenger around for that landfall triggers anyways. So you saddle something else, you sacrifice, you get to play a bunch of lands, and all your plants grow. Or even just playing lands, your plants just grow. So good synergistic there. Bird's Paradise, just a mana dork. Bristly Bill, this is a very nice nice landfall trigger. There's gonna be some landfall synergies, as you can tell by the commander. It makes sense. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you get a 1/1 counter on target creature, and then you can pay 5 mana, double the number of counters on each creature you control. So it's a way for you to spend all that mana that you're getting, and take advantage of that landfall triggers. You've got Demigoth Titan, one of these cards that I told you before. Big, dirtily creatures for really, really cheap. 4 mana for an 11/10. Pretty dang strong, but whenever it attacks or blocks, you sacrifice a creature. Well, you aren't going to be attacking or blocking with it, hopefully. You're just going to be tapping it, saddling your Gitrog monster, and then drawing 11 cards and playing up to 11 lands. Yeah. So you got Demigoth Woe Eater, 4 mana for 7/6. Another one of those things where, yeah, low amount of cost for high amount of value. At the beginning of your upkeep, you sacrifice a creature. This one you have to be careful of, because you have to make sure you have something to sacrifice. Unless you're playing it and then immediately saddling it and then attacking, then you don't have to worry about any of it. But when you sacrifice Demigoth Woe Eater, each opponent discards a card, and you draw a card, and you gain 2 life. So very synergistic there. So you'll probably won't have to worry about this too much. Deathray Shaman, this is just a mana dork, but also if you exile something from the graveyard, but you can also exile target instant sorcery card from a graveyard, each opponent loses 2 life, and you can tap it and also exile a creature from the graveyard, gain 2 life. This is just a very versatile, I mainly think of it as a mana dork that has like extra stuff on it, kind of like a Planeswalker-esque. Mana dork there, just straight up mana dork. There's also a mana dork that gets better when you have large creatures. Lots of mana for power 4 or more. Your commander has power 4 or more, so this should be turned on quite often. You got Gulta Primal Hunger, another one of those cards that are like typically super cheap. This should be very cheap because your commander's at the least a 6/5, so this should be discounted by at least 6. Even if your commander's not out there, you've got all the other like cards that are super cheap to get this out there. And then if you don't always have to saddle it, this could just be a 12/12 attacker. But if you do saddle, you'll draw 12 cards, which is great. Gwenna, Eyes of Gaia, 3 mana for a 2/3, and you tap it to add mana of any combination. So it's like a mana. You can only cast it for creature spells or activate abilities of creatures or a creature card. But whenever you cast a creature spell power 5 or greater, you get a 1/1 counter, and then you untap it. So it's kind of like discounting all of your big creatures that you cast a lot of by 2. Honest Rutstein, 3 mana for a 3/2, and then whenever it enters the battlefield, return target creature card from graveyard to your hand. Because you're sacrificing a lot of those creatures to get the triggers from your commander, from your saddle, you're going to want to get those back, or any card really, any creature card. But then it also discounts your creature card by 1, which is pretty good. You got Hunted Bone Brute, 3 mana 6/2 with Menace. It has also Disguise, which you'll probably never disguise it. Actually, don't ever disguise it. And then when it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 2 1/1 dog creatures, which is whatever. And then when it dies, each opponent loses 3 life. So it's actually it almost has no downside. The 1/1s that they get, I mean, they could be used against you, but just make sure to give it to the right player. One that can't take advantage of them as much as just getting 2 1/1s. You've got Gerard, Golgari Lich Lord, 4 mana for a 2/2, and it gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. Because you're going to be sacrificing a lot of creatures, it makes sense. You'll be able to play this. But then you can also pay 3 mana, sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's value. So this is kind of like an alternate commander. Say somebody takes care of your Gitrog monster and you can't get it back. This guy will be a similar situation where each opponent losing X life, 10, 11, 12. That's pretty good for 3. And then you can sacrifice a swamp and a forest and return it from your graveyard to your hand. So a little bit of value there for recursion of purposes. Mana Dark there. Looping Prototype. None of those cards are super cheap because it has a really dumb ability, but you don't care about that. You're just using it to sack. So it can't attack or block unless some opponent has no, or some player has no card in their hand. But you're just using it to saddle. Same thing with this one. 3 mana 8/8. Cumulative upkeep, sacrifice a creature. Obviously, you don't want to have this on the battlefield for longer than being able to just saddle it with a Gitrog monster and get that value. Pugnacious Hammerskull, 3 mana for a 6/6. When it attacks while you don't control another dinosaur, you put a stun counter on it. You don't really care about that. It's just 3 mana 6/6 you saddle. Rampaging Bailoff, this is to take advantage of the landfall triggers that you'll inevitably have. It's a 6 mana 6/6 trampler that gives you 4/4 beasts when it enters the battlefield under your control. Relic Golem, this is just a 3 mana 6/6 that you'll be using for your Gitrog Master saddling. Rotting Regisaur, same thing, 3 mana 7/6. At the beginning of your upkeep, discard a card. So you only really want to play this guy when you can saddle it immediately and get rid of it. Skew Swarm, this guy just gets out of hand with landfall triggers. The moment you have 6 or more land, he becomes a copy of Skew Swarm, and then they duplicate over and over and over again, and it's just like 6 times, 8 times, 24 times, and you'll have hundreds if you have a bunch of lands coming to the battlefield all at once. It's pretty crazy. They all see each other, so Skew Swarm gets out of hand very quickly. I'm sure if you've ever played against it, you'd see it. Savala, Heart of the Wild, 3 mana for a 2/3. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. You'll most likely always have the highest power because you're playing all the big, dirty, dumb dudes. But you have to remember that this can trigger from your opponent's stuff, so they may have the ability to draw cards, but you pay a green, tap it, add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control, so you're getting tons of mana from this, which is pretty great. Shakedown Heavy, 3 mana. This is just one of those cards you just don't even worry about any of this other stuff. It's just used for saddling. I'll just call them saddle creatures. That'll just make it easier. So Springheart and Tuco, this is landfall creatures. What's crazy about this is that it has Bestow for the same cost as itself. Enchant your creature gets +1/+1, and then landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If Springheart and Nantuko is attached to a creature, if you do, you can create a token that's a copy of that creature, or you get a 1/1 insect if you don't. So it's a good value if you just happen to not have it attached to any creature. You just get a bunch of 1/1s for all your lands under the battlefield. Otherwise, you just get a potential copies of a bunch of stuff you have, like copying your Rampaging Bailoff, for instance. Pretty good. Talos Prisoner, this is kind of like a mana dork with all the landfalls. So it's landfall. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to create a treasure or a food. I almost always pick treasure. That's probably why I read it first, treasure, or I almost never pick food, but there could be some situations where you take some food. Wayward Swordtooth, this is one of the saddle creatures, but it also has the ability to give you extra land drops per turn. Very strong creature. Yargle and Mutani, this is just a saddle creature, 6 mana for an 18/6. You've got Yargle, Glutton of Urborg, another saddle creature, 5 mana for a 9 power creature. Battleguard Recovery, this is one of those modal dual lands that just has like an amazing ability on it. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand, otherwise it's the land, which is great. Most notably, you cannot choose to put this into the battlefield when you're using Gitrog's ability. It's not a land on its front, so you can't put it into play. Culling Ritual, this is just to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less, and you get to add green and black for each permanent destroyed this way. This is one of those ways to clear all those mana rocks, and including your own, all those mana rocks, mana dorks, on the opposing side of the field, hopefully, and then get your commander out there, saddle it up with all that mana you just gained, and then get some value right away. So, a very strong card. Definitely recommend. Farseek, just mana ramp, you need it. Try to get your commander as soon as possible, same thing there. Reanimate, this is just, you're putting all those big creatures into the graveyard for cheap. You might as well reanimate those for also cheap. So you put target creature card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under control, you lose life equal to its mana value. Most of the mana value are pretty low. Don't reanimate Gulta, but like all the other ones are pretty good. 3 visits, another mana ramp. Toxic Deluge, board wipe. When you cast it, you can pay X life, and all creatures get -X till end of turn. Most of your stuff is going to be quite large, so being able to wipe everything else out and then get in there with your Gitrog monster, he just has to deal 1 damage. So even if you turn it into a 1/1 but you wipe the board, once you deal that 1 damage, you can sacrifice that creature, which will also be a little smaller, but you'll still gain value. Victimize. Choose target creature. It's a sorcery for 3. Choose target creature card in your. Choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard. Sacrifice a creature. If you do, return those creature cards to the battlefield tapped. Another way to recur big things you can use to saddle. But most notably, they do come in the battlefield tapped, so you can't saddle them. This might not be great, but I don't know. It seemed good at the time. You got Abrupt Decay. This is just solid removal that can't be countered for things that are destroy target permanents with a mana value 3 or less. For 2 mana. Really nice. You just need removal. Archer's Shard's fantastic card. 3 green, choose 1. You have to search your library for a creature or land card, reveal it, put it onto the battlefield if it's a land, otherwise put it into your hand, then shuffle. So nice little tutor ability for lands or creatures, which is great because you need those big creatures to trigger the saddle from Gitrog Monster. Or you might need a land, you know? Like Field of the Dead, for instance. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature card or creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, so it's a removal for creatures. Hey, look at that. It's also removal for artifacts or enchantments, and it's exile. It is triple green, but it's only a 2-color deck, and there's tons of green sources, so you shouldn't have too much of a problem with that. Super flexible, very good card. Assassin Trophy, another removal for 2 mana instant. Destroy target permanent opponent controls, and they get to go search for a basic land card. Beast Within, destroy target permanent, its controller gets a 3/3 for 3 mana instant speed. Dark Ritual, one of the ways to power out your commander quickly, but obviously don't power out the commander if you don't have anything to saddle with it. I mean, you could, but they'd probably try to do it with the 1/2, put a big creature and then power it out. Deadly Relic, just a very strong removal, so it's 4 mana to exile target creature, but if you control your commander, you can just pay it. It's just free removal. Heroic Intervention, we're going to get to the point where there's going to be you'll see a lot of cards that are protection cards because it's kind of a Voltron-y deck in a ways that you're getting tons of value from the Gitrog monster, and they're going to want to remove it. So there's a lot of these kind of cards to protect your commander, because once you stick it, there's like a lot of vulnerable spots where you're at, where once you saddle it, they can kill the monster before you deal the damage, and then you can't sacrifice it, which is a big feels bad. So you'll have these instant spells to then give yourself protection. You'll need a lot of them. So Heroic Intervention is one of them. 2 mana, permanent you control, gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. Very strong card. Almost every green deck should run it. Infernal Grasp, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life just for instant speed. Just gotta have removal. Malakir Rebirth, this is one of those cards. This card's actually really fantastic because it's a land on the other side. And there's a battlefield tap, that's okay. Choose target creature, you lose 2 life. Until end of turn, that creature gains. When this creature dies, return to the battlefield tapped under its controller's control. Most notably, unfortunately, if they kill something that's saddled, and then you use this on that creature, it won't still be saddled by that creature because it's like a new instance of that creature. So you won't get this sacrifice it, but at least you get to keep it for the next time. And then of course your commander as well, you get to keep it. Nature's Claim, destroy target artifact or enchantment, its controller gains 4 life. The gains 4 life isn't that relevant at all. And just having an instant speed for 1 green mana is just super, super nice. Not Dead After All, another one of those abilities where it saves your creature and enters the battlefield with a roll token if it dies, and then it comes back tapped. Putrefy, another good removal. Destroy target artifact or creature. Can't be regenerated for 3 mana. Instant speed. Smuggler Surprise. This is a very, very, very versatile card. Very strong as well. It's one of the new mechanics called Spree. You get to choose 1 or more additional cost depending on how much mana you pay. You get to do certain things or all of it. So it's 1 green instant for 2 colorless mana in addition to the 1 green. You mill 4 cards. You can put up to 2 creature cards or land cards from among them into your hand. That instant speed. That's pretty cool. 3 mana. You get to basically draw 2. For 5 mana in addition to the 1 mana, so 6 total mana, you can put 2 creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Very cheaty-like ability, but for 6 mana, it's pretty decent at instant speed. Not even tapped. And then you can pay just 1 green mana and a colorless, and creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. Again, one of those savior cards. Very versatile, very flexible, very good card. And you're ramping a ton, so you could probably do all of it in some situations. Tamiyo Safekeeping, another one of those things where target permanent control gains hexproof and indestructible till end of turn. You gain 2 life. Very safety card. Terra Sunder, exile target artifact or enchantment for instant speed. If it was kicked, you could exile target non-land permanent instead. So it's 4 mana for a permanent, or just 2 mana for an artifact or enchantment. But most notably is exile. The One Ring exists, folks. So indestructibility is the thing. You want to exile it. You got Tyvar Stand and one of those protection things, but also because you have so much mana, it gives target creature +X/+X, and not only that, hexproof and indestructible. So that's also not. And then there could be a way to kill somebody with commander damage if you've got enough mana. And we got a Vigor, very strong card. All of the lands come into the battlefield tapped for the Gitrog monster. However, if you use Amulet of Vigor, whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped under your controller, under your control, untap it. So that's pretty cool, and I guess it makes Victimize better. You've got Arcane Syndic for mana ramp, Blackblade Reforged. So there's a couple of equipment in the deck and a couple of cards that like make the Gitrog Ravenous ride like stronger. I felt that like it's kind of a Voltron-y deck where like you're trying to kill with the commander, but you also need to like make him big enough to like not just die to like, because he's only a 6/5, so you like kind of have to go over the top. So there's like a couple like very strong cards that like do that, and because this deck gets so many lands, the Blackblade Reforged made sense. Because it's a 2 mana legendary artifact equipment that equips the equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. That's pretty good. And then equip legendary creatures only 3 to equip. The 7 is like don't ever. That's rough. But legendary creature 7 for only 3. That's pretty good. It's a Mana Rock. Sword of Feast of Famine. And those are the things where like Feast of Famine, like untapping all your lands is really strong. Having them discard a card is pretty good too, and then also growing your commander and giving it protection from black and green is also pretty good. Although now that I think about it, this might be a bait card. If you give it protection from black and green, you can't save your own creature. Yeah, that might be worth changing out. So I don't know. Keep an eye on the deck list. It might change. The Skullspore Nexus, this is really good cards. 8 mana, but it's a legendary artifact, and it gets a less casting cost for where X is the greatest power amongst creatures you control. You'll most likely always cast this for 2 green. Whenever one or more non-token creatures you control die, create a green fungus dinosaur creature token with base power and toughness equal to the total power of those creatures. And then you can pay 2 mana, tap it, double target's creature's power until end of turn. You'll get into a lot of situations where you'll like want to double the power of the creature that you're going to sacrifice that saddled the Ravenous Ride, which is a really good value. But in some situations, it might just be better just to like double the power of Gitrog to do 12 commander damage, you know? So I guess it's use at your discretion, but the ability to do that instant speed for like basically no mana is just still very strong anyways. Mana Rock, and also notably, you will draw a lot of cards. You'll want to have a no maximum hand size as often as possible. I think I'd run both Relic Waytar and the Thought Vessel. Animate Dead, you'll want to have a ways to get stuff back, so there's a couple Animate Deads in here because you're sacrificing those big creatures and you want to be able to saddle them again, so you get them back for very cheap, so you want to have some abilities like that. That's just enchant something in the graveyard, brings it back to the battlefield, and then you get to saddle it again. Group's Uprising, you're playing a lot of things with high power, so this is a very synergistic enchantment for 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. You almost always will. And then creatures you control have trample, very relevant, although your commander always has trample, but still relevant. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you draw a card. Like I said, you're playing tons of big creatures, you'll draw some cards for sure. Greater Good, another one of those ways to like kind of get around getting blown out. Greater Good is a 4-mana enchantment. Sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrifice creature's power, then draw 3 cards or discard 3 cards. So like say you saddle with something and they go to try to kill either your commander or the creature that is saddled. You can just sacrifice it to Greater Good, draw a bunch of cards, and then discard 3, which is still very good because most of the creatures have, as we've seen, big power. So draw 18, discard 3 is still pretty good. Spelunking. This is kind of like another Amulet of Vigor in the deck. 3-mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Then you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put a cave onto the battlefield, you gain 4 life. You won't. But lands you control enter the battlefield untapped, which is very relevant for the Gitrog's ability. So you have 2 abilities that make them come untapped. Unnatural Growth. This is basically like the artifact that we talked about, where you get to double the powers of your creature. But this doubles every combat doubles the power. The power and toughness of each of your creatures until end of turn. Pretty good. Making your dude a 12 power plus the thing you're going to saddle. This is very strong. You need a way to win the game, and that's the way to do it. One way to do it. This is just a mana ramp. Enchant your land. And right now we're into lands. Bojuka Bog, you got to have some way to interact with the graveyard. A lot of times people they pop off and their graveyard's filled with a bunch of stuff and they're doing a bunch of graveyard shenanigans like reanimating and all that kind of stuff. And you just have to have a way to get rid of it. So that's why it's in here. Beseju, very strong green card, or green land, I should say. It's a green forest, basically. Taps for a green, and then you can also channel it, discard it, and destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls, and then they can search your library for a land with a basic land type. And it costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So very strong channeled ability. It's an activated ability, so it can't be countered unless it's stifled. Multicolored land, dual land, one of those modal lands, very cool, like it. Dual land there, dual land there. Field of the Dead, very strong, enters the battlefield tapped unless you have one of those Amulet of Vigor effects. Taps for a colorless, but then also, whenever it enters the battlefield, whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you create a 2/2 black creature zombie token. You'll get tons of value from this, because that's what the commander does. Forest. Golgari Raw Farm. This is a bounce land. I don't love the bounce lands, but when you have landfall triggers in the deck, it makes sense to run them. Dual land, fetch land, fetch land. Mossmore Bridge, one of those hideaway bridges, or hideaway lands. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards, and then you can put one of them underneath the land, and then you can, well, it's exiled, but you can play the exiled card as long as you have power 10 or more across all your creatures. And you'll most likely always have that, no problem. Land, dual land. So Reliquary Tower, no maximum hand size, useful to have. Just gotta have a couple of those in the deck. Giving your dude unblockable could be useful with the Rogue's Patches. It's normally just tapping for a colorless, but then also you can make your creature that can't be blocked. Just gives your Gitrog a little bit of safety if the field is like full of a bunch of crap. Shizo Death Storehouse, very strong card. Target creature gains fear until end of turn, and it can't be blocked except by artifact or black creatures. So it's kind of same situation. It's just a really nice, just like basic. It's basically a swamp, but then it has this extra flexibility to give your guy a little bit of evasion because it just has trample haste, so it can still die. Swamp. This one's just a way you can channel. It's basically just a swamp that you can channel, discard it, and you can mill 3 cards, return a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand, and it costs 1 less for every legendary creature you control. Just nice little extra value if you need it. Dual land there, dual land there. It's one of the Surveil ones. Yeah, this is one of the Surveil lands. I'm trying out the Surveil lands. They're probably fine. When it enters the battlefield, you get to Surveil. You get to look at the top card of your library and put it on into your graveyard if you don't like it. Kind of like Scry, but not as good. But it's fetchable. That's the nice thing. It's fetchable. Dual land there, fetch land, dual land, fetch land, fetch land. A lot of fetch lands because you get a lot of landfall triggers. It makes sense. Yavi Maui to make everything a forest, just because you gotta make sure you hit your lands. You could probably remove this. It's one of those things where it's like sometimes this helps your opponents, and maybe you don't want that. And then we're back to the Gitrog monster. So I hope you guys liked everything. If you liked the video, like, comment, and share, and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, make sure to put it down in the comment section below. Keep an eye on the deck list, like I said. Sword of Feast of Famine might be a little bit of a nombo because of all the protection spells we have are green and black. So it doesn't really make a ton of sense to run it. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.